Hello, everyone. Welcome to our event this evening. The City of West Hollywood presents our Human Rights Speaker Series virtual panel discussion, Breaking Fast, Exploring the Intersection of Faith and Sexual Identity. And I had a few minutes to speak with our moderator and panelists just a little bit as we were preparing to get started. And I am so excited for the program that we have in store for you. Tonight, we're presenting as part of the City of West Hollywood's One City, One Pride LGBTQ Arts Festival. And this panel discussion is based on Breaking Fast, a romantic comedy that follows Mo, a practicing Muslim living in West Hollywood and still reeling from heartbreak. And our panel tonight will discuss the feature film, its themes related to navigating the difficult conversations and real life impacts of faith, sexual identity, and community. And I know that these complicated discussions happen a lot in especially in our families, but it's in community that we find the safety to really open up and explore very challenging topics. And so I'm glad our community has opened up this opportunity to do just that. And in order to get us started, I'm going to turn it over on behalf of all of our colleagues. I want to say thank you very much for participating, to all of our panelists, and for joining us this evening, everyone who's in attendance. And now I will turn it over to my colleague, Councilmember John Erickson, who's academically was trained on this very topic and now gets to put it to good use. John, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Madam Mayor. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited for tonight's panel discussion about a movie that just really is quite incredible. And if you've had the chance to see it, or if you're going to go see it after this, I can't wait for you to really experience what I got to re-experience last night when I got to rewatch it in preparation. I would love to invite all the panelists to turn on their camera. I'm going to go ahead and start introducing everyone. We have quite the esteemed crowd tonight. I'm so excited that everyone could be here and make some time for their schedules. I want to go ahead and let everyone know that we will have a Q&A portion at the end. And if you have a question, you can email arts@weho.org and we'll read it off. We will have time for that. So think of it now, before we get to it. But I'm really excited to go ahead and really start introducing our panel. And first and foremost, I want to introduce Mike Masalam, the writer and director of Breaking Fast. He is a producer, director, and writer for theater, film, and television. Through his production company, he and his team have produced short films Breaking Fast and Brothers, both written and directed by Mike, along with the short film Ubuntu, a co-production with the Muslim Public Affairs Council. His feature film debut, Breaking Fast, which is based on a short, had its world premiere at the Cinequest Film Festival in March 2020 and its Los Angeles premiere shortly thereafter at Outfest Fusion. And after playing more than 65 festivals worldwide and winning major awards, it was acquired for distribution by Vertical Entertainment and released on Apple TV, iTunes, Amazon, and anywhere else you can buy or rent movies on demand. And I think you can watch it on Hulu now, if I'm not mistaken. So, because that's how I watched it last night. So definitely go and do that later. He is the creator and co-executive producer of the critically acclaimed TLC series All American Muslim. And most recently, Mike is the executive creative consultant on season 2 of Hulu's Rami. He is currently writing his second feature loosely based on a true story. He is a proud Muslim, Lebanese American, and fluent in Arabic. Welcome, Mike. Next, we have Christopher Hanke, who plays John in the film Breaking Fast. Really excited that you can join us. Christopher is currently co-starring in the Amazon series After Forever and just received an Indie Series Award nomination for his work on the show. He can be seen in the upcoming HBO series I Know This Much Is True from director Derek Sinefrance and writer Gina Prince Brythewood. Probably did not say that correctly, I apologize. Hanke also stars with John Cameron Mitchell's new podcast series, Anthem, with Patti LuPone, Cynthia Erivo, Glenn Close, and Marion Cotillard. And Hanke has been seen recurring on CBS's Kevin Can't Wait Younger and Bravo's Odd Mom Out. Notably, Christopher starred in the hit one-man comedy Buyer and Cellar in New York and Toronto to rave reviews. And before he starred as Bud Frump in the Broadway revival of How to Succeed opposite Daniel Radcliffe. And it's an amazing musical, by the way. So welcome, Christopher. Next up, we have Iman Abdulhadi from the Muslim Alliance for Sexual and Gender Diversity. Iman is a queer Muslim academic, activist, and artist based in Chicago. She is a co-coordinator of the Muslim Alliance for Sexual and Gender Diversity and assistant professor at the University of Chicago. Her research focuses on issues of gender, sexuality, religion, and migration, while her activism focuses on building queer community. Themed around memory and transnationalism, Iman's artistic work meanders between written and performed poetry, stand-up comedy, and forays into fiction. Muslim Alliance for Sexual and Gender Diversity works to support, empower, and connect LGBTQ Muslims. In their work, they challenge root causes of oppression, including misogyny, racism, capitalism, ableism, and xenophobia. And they celebrate gender and sexual diversity within Muslim communities and promote an understanding of Islam that is centered on inclusion, justice, and equality. And what a great way to continue our One City, One Pride and kickoff Pride here in a couple of days. Welcome so much. And last, but certainly not least, is we have Benay Lape, and she is the founder and Rosh Hashiva of, I'm sorry, I just lost my page. Either way, we ordained by the Jewish Theological Seminary in 1997. Benay also currently serves as a senior fellow at the Institute for the Next Jewish Future in Chicago and as associate at CLL, the National Jewish Center for Learning and Leadership. As an award-winning educator specializing in the application of queer theory to Talmud study, Benay also served on the faculty of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, Temple University, American Jewish University, the Reconstructionalist Rabbinical College, the Graduate Theological Union Center for Jewish Studies at UC Berkeley, Millikan Community High School, and the Wexner Institute. Welcome so much, Benay. So we have quite an esteemed panelist. I mean, their bios speak for themselves, but I'm going to kick the first question over to Mike. I want to know the story behind the story. Why did you choose to create the short film and then the feature film?
Yeah, hi. Thanks so much for having us, council member. And we're so grateful for the city of West Hollywood for encouraging this event. Breaking Fast, both as a short and as a feature, really came about when a friend of mine, creator of a great TV show on HBO called Looking, asked me if I had ever seen myself represented in anything on film and television. And the reality is, you know, within the context of the intersectionality of my own identities, the identities of my own friends, I had not. And I knew that I wanted to figure out a way to create something that both reflected my experience, not autobiographically, but just in the general sense, and also sort of tackle the conversations that were very commonplace in and around the circles that I was keeping and my friends, etc. And so I went off and wrote it. I wrote the short to Breaking Fast. I shared that with one of the producers of Looking, who is now my producing partner, Mr. Seth Hauer. He said, we have to make this, helped develop and shepherd the project alongside with me. And our esteemed group of producers. And then from there, that short had such a life of its own. And we were fortunate enough to go to the Cannes Film Festival with it. And then from there, there was just such an audience response for more of that story, more stories like it. What happened to these two guys? What's the next phase of their relationship? And it was on the plane home from Cannes that I started developing what the feature version of that short story would look like, or short film would look like. And I think 4 or 5 years later, here we are now, yes, on Hulu. And so it's very exciting.
It's so great, and everyone needs to watch it and watch it again. I want to shoot this over to the next, anyone, feel free to jump in here, but these types of films, as Mike really mentioned, is something that we don't see in popular culture in a lot of ways, but then how we also deal with religion and sexuality often seem as taboo. We see the main character himself dealing with really what that means and the characters around him and that negotiation. Christopher, as an actor, what drew you to this role? What did you get most out of it? And really, when you're looking for parts in Hollywood that, portray LGBTQ identity or faith, are there a lot? And if not, why?
Well, I mean, what drew me to the project, when you see great writing and the creators of a piece, whether it's a play or a TV show or a short or a feature, there's also you want health insurance. So, but you look at the content, you look at the writing, and when I devoured this feature, I devoured the script instantly, and I could just tell that before I even Googled Mike and his body of work, I was like, this person is from the theater. They get it. They know, and I'm from the theater. So I think that just innately or in my DNA, I felt like a kinship with Mike so just the writing, the actual art of it was beautiful, and I wanted to be a part of that. So that's your first question. And then the second question, are there a lot of stories in Hollywood about LGBTQ plus characters and faith? There aren't, except for I used to be Mormon and now I'm not. I used to be Baptist and now I'm not. I used to be Catholic and now I'm not. It was always leaving their religious roots behind and then praising their LGBTQ identity. And what is so effing incredible about this film is that you can do both. That you do not have to leave your faith or go against your sexual identity, and that you can celebrate both, and that is a rarity on stage, on TV, on the big screen. So it's exciting to be a part of that.
Mormon, Baptist, and Catholic. I mean, there's a play in there somewhere in some way, shape, or form, a one-man show. We got to figure that out for next year's Pride. But thank you for sharing that. I mean, that's so deeply personal and such a great connection to showing why Mike in this film draws us so much. I mean, Iman, Benet, I would love for you to draw upon a little bit more about what he's saying about how you can have both, how you can be faithful as well as be proud in your sexual identity. Whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, I'll jump in. At Svara, the queer and trans yeshiva that I founded, that was what you were mentioning, yes. Councilman John. We have this theory. It's called a crash theory. And the theory really is the story of what so many of us as queer people had to confront when we came out. And if we had grown up in a traditional setting, we had three choices. And we were probably initially only aware of two choices: the take it or leave it. As you were saying, Christopher, either I suppress who I am, I deny it, and I keep my place in my tradition, or I completely reject my tradition and, I live as a fabulous queer person, but I'm always missing that tradition, which you really can't set down because it's a part of you. But there's a third option, and every tradition that's survived for more than a generation or two has a secret mechanism of change, even though it tells the story about itself that it's always been this way, that this is a fixed, unchanging tradition that isn't the way traditions work. And this third option is when you reinterpret the tradition, and that sometimes means finding the most original, dynamic mechanisms or version of the tradition. And what I think is fascinating about the movie, Mike, is that you have told a story in which all three of these options are played out in the different characters. And though each of the three options are not simple either for any of them.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
I also think it's worth mentioning and just to say, I think people who in the choice of the either or, the all or nothing, it's kind of, it would be similar for me if I ever chose to live within only my LGBTQ identity, I would equally be denying a part of myself by saying that I don't have or can't have faith in the same exact way that by living within the identity of my faith, I would be denying a portion of myself by not honoring who I am within the spectrum of the LGBTQ plus community. Both closets really don't need, it's, you know, they're both, you don't need to belong. You know what I'm saying? I ruined that last part, but you know what I'm saying.
It was great. Iman, I want to throw it over to you and have you chime in.
Sure. Thank you. Such excellent points being made. I think, and actually, I think this is a good segue from what you were saying, Mike, is that I think both in my own personal experience as a queer Muslim person, but also in the experiences I've seen within various queer Muslim communities that have been built, is that even when people try option number 2, where they say, okay, I'm gonna just go like live my life and, you know, I'm just gonna, they experience a lot of racism and Islamophobia in mainstream queer spaces. And so I think a lot of the attempt to build option number 3 is also, is both because people get a lot out of their faith and some relationship with their community, even if it's not, you know, the same as what they grew up with, but also because sometimes those other spaces can feel unsafe in certain ways, or unwelcoming or painful, or having to play the role, you know, of the sort of educator. So I think actually, Christopher, your character, you know, really sort of really encapsulates that in ways that were both, you know, funny and painful to watch as a queer person. But I think, you know, 2 other dimensions of this is that the film actually does something that a lot of straight portrayals of Muslim Americans don't do, which is to portray someone who is actually practicing. So part of the critique in the mainstream community of, you know, many of the shows that have popped up in movies about Muslim Americans is that it has to be a secular Muslim person for them to be relatable. And ironic, you know, it's funny because watching this film, it was like, this is probably the most practicing Muslim character I've seen, you know, in an American film production. So that was, you know, it also speaks to the ways that queer folks can help do things that even like that can't be done in non-queer spaces or that haven't been done.
Speaking of queer spaces and how you really shot this film, I mean, those spaces are so critical to not only our community, but ultimately how we feel safe and secure in what we're doing. I mean, Mike, you chose to shoot this in West Hollywood, a city I love and am very close to. I think many of us know as West Hollywood as that big gay rainbow city on a hill that you can all go to, but sometimes you don't fit in. Sometimes you don't feel like you belong. What about West Hollywood maybe drew you to this film? And if it was because we were just easy to work with, you can say that too. That's great for the future for if we want to do anything. But really, what about West Hollywood really made you want to center your short as well as the feature along as a main? It's a main character in the film, in my opinion. It plays a role. Why West Hollywood?
I mean, absolutely, it's a character, and it was always intended to be a character as much as any of the human characters, right? And frankly, yes, the city of West Hollywood, the Eddie Robinson, the mayor's office. I mean, you know, from a filming standpoint, is very easy to work with and worked tremendously with us, especially when we hit some production obstacles with rain, which is like very rare in LA, you know.
Very.
So, you know, and both the short and the feature on our exterior walk and talk days, it rained. It was just sort of beautiful on screen and really annoying in the moment. But also, I mean, like as a shorter than 5'10", heavier than 165, more tan than white person living in West Hollywood, have a very specific experience when I walk down the street or when I've been to, you know, the bars or the restaurants or gone to parties. You know, I think there is a and this isn't specific to West Hollywood, I think within the context of the LGBTQ community, there is just inherently a hierarchy And a lot of that is physically driven, and it has made me feel othered in spaces as much, if not more, than some religious spaces that I've been in. And I say that all sort of with like tongue in cheek and a little heart in it as well, because it's obviously my community, and I love West Hollywood, and I certainly hang out in West Hollywood. But I also think there's like there is a little bit of turning the camera back on and saying, hey, how can we as a community be better? How can we sort of see these experiences as real and as existing for some? And how do we all come together to sort of be as much of an inclusive space with one another as we expect the general larger world to be for us?
One thing that I really discovered while I was writing my dissertation is how religious groups themselves in the larger LGBTQ community always kind of get put at the back of the line, right? There's a lot of animosity when you think about things such as Prop 8 or the Defense of Marriage Act, or all these things that, younger generations grew up with, or the way in which Catholicism and, conservative religions responded to HIV/AIDS, or at a time when the city of West Hollywood was created in the mid 80s. This is for Benet and Iman, where can we find the ways in which we can find that nexus to negotiate sexuality and spirituality? In essence, that we don't need to have our religious leaders, who are just as important and community gatherers, speak at the last part of the march, but how we can have them speak at the beginning when it's just as important. Iman, I'll toss it to you first.
Yeah, thank you. I think the whole idea of kind of the compartmentalizing is exactly the sort of point, right? If you're compartmentalizing people's faith, it sort of follows up on a long tradition of tokenization, right? But if you sort of integrate it into what's going on, so thinking about faith groups, like for example, Masjid does work that is, we do work that is political, we do work that is social, we do work that is just community building. And so it's not only as a sort of checkbox of like the faith organization that we might be engaged with, right? We can be called upon for the march, the BLM march or whatever. So I think seeing faith organizations as collectives rather than as specifically just about religion.
Mm-hmm.
Especially for those of us for whom religion is also a racialized category, right? So it's not just, something we do at the mosque or whatever and walk away from it. It's also tied to our often ethnic and racial identities as well.
Totally. Benet, I want to throw it over to you here.
Yeah, I think the aspect of your question I want to address is that the solution to not getting at the back of the parade in all realms is for us to become leaders, is for queer people to become educated in our own traditions and become the transformers of our own traditions, and to create new centers, not in the status quo, but way out front. I am not a big fan of inclusion, and because inclusion tends to be about a space keeping its messed up, whitey white, heteronormative, ableist culture, while imagining that they can bring in people with different values, life experiences, and have them become full human beings there. That's just not going to happen. So I think we need to create dedicated spaces where we stand in front of the room of people like us, so they can see themselves in their religious leaders and in the leaders generally, and create new centers where we're retelling the stories of what our traditions are really about through our queer lens.
And I think, Iman, you really broke down it quite beautifully when you're talking about not just this Judeo-Christian angle in which we're really looking at religion that we see practiced on screen a lot of the time, right? When you really look at a devout Muslim gay man, what does that actually mean to break down not only the religious narrative, the sexual narrative, but also the racial narrative? And I would love to kind of peel back, and Mike and Christopher and Vinay, feel free to chime into this, but how do we disrupt the system more with films like this or activism like this? I mean, the action of a man, an openly devout queer Muslim man walking down the street defies what you think about as, you know, this homonormative angle that we see. You know, where and how can we continue to create spaces like this that aren't tokenized, but truly, this is, for lack of a better word, original and creative? Iman, I'm going to turn it to you, and then anyone feel free to chime in.
Sure. I don't know that I have all the solutions, but I would say, I mean, I love the point that you just made, Rabbi, which is, this leadership. I think, the way that I was socialized into queer liberation as a political theory is that everyone gets free when queer people get free, right? It's not just about, primarily, of course, it's about our liberation as queer folks, but also about imagining a different social structure in a way that only queer people can. And I think within the Muslim community, as someone who also, does research on Muslim American communities for a living, there's actually people who are identify as straight are looking towards queer Muslims as leaders of what it might be like to reimagine Muslim spaces. I've had people say, well, I wanted somebody to marry me and my partner who's not Muslim. And we thought, well, if we find a gay imam, like maybe the gay imam will do it because they're more progressive than us. And so I think it's about imagining different futures, and then exactly as Vinay said, enacting them and letting the rest of the world follow along, because they're actually craving and thirsting for those spaces themselves.
Whoever else wants to chime in on that, there was a lot to unpack.
Well, I'm just a dumb actor.
No, you are not.
I want to say that everything I'm about to say, everyone needs to filter it through the lens of that. But I would say two things came to mind. We were like, how can we make more movies, more films, more projects like this, where we're seeing both of these issues forward? And I think one thing that comes to mind is that we have more producers and more people with money who are willing to support these types of projects. Like to get to even put on a play off Broadway, you need hundreds of thousands of dollars to, we need the money. So for those, and I don't have answers for that, right? Like, I don't know, does an organization need to be founded? Do we need to actively recruit people that have money, that are also progressive and that are open-minded? Yes, all that, yes, maybe. But I think that more people need to come forward that have the money to allow these projects, which are traditionally not funded, have difficulty in raising money. So the first one thing that comes to mind. And then the other thing is, and I know this is so trite, but education, because listen, people resist what they fear and they fear what they don't know. So if we can bridge that gap of like, don't be afraid of this storytelling. Don't be against it. Let's introduce you to it. And that's a little chicken and the egg, because in order to be introduced to it, they need to see more programming about it, or they need to know somebody. But I think that the education part, which is more films like this, and then what can help make more films like this and put it in front of eyeballs are distributors, producers, the money, the companies, the organizations, the corporations that can financially support.
I think in addition to everything that Christopher and Iman were saying is just the community believing their story is worth telling. Right? Starting with the storyteller and starting with the person who, is seeing a version of their story reflected back to them, but not their specific story, and saying my story is also worth telling. There are so few people who believe that, people want to hear about their specific, authentic, nuanced self. And I think it's that specificity that leads people to see our similarities within the universality of it. And so I would say yes to everything Christopher said. And also let's create an impeccable pipeline of stories that are just bursting to be told.
Truly. Anae, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that being able to see who you can become, and that third option is everything. Because if there isn't a landing pad for you to be queer and a person of faith, then you're stuck with those two options. You're stuck with, I can only be one or the other. So I think these stories and all of the options that these stories create are really everything, whether they're movies or books. But yes, sharing our stories. And Iman, I think you're absolutely right that, as queer people and as people of color, we're on the sort of cutting edge of the crumble of how do we put together our tradition and ourselves. But there are so many people who are, they look mainstream and they look like they're sort of what the tradition wants us to be, and they're really unhappy. I remember when I was in rabbinical school, you couldn't be out, so I was in the closet, and I thought that it was only me and the other closeted rabbinical students, some of whom were out to each other, who were in closets. Turns out everybody was in a closet. All the straight students were in a closet, whether it was because they watched TV on Shabbat, which is traditionally forbidden in the conservative world where I come from, or because they ate hard cheese that didn't have a certain kosher certification. Everyone was in the closet about something. And when you create an alternative space where you say, you know what, those old markers of legitimacy they really aren't the right ones anymore. A lot of people who seem to be happy are now realizing that they themselves weren't all that happy, and they're going to find a liberatory space in these places that we create.
Yeah, and we also need to write it, produce it, and see it. And Christopher, that's why we need amazing actors like yourself that really put it all out there in every which way, shape, and form. I remember when I first watched Queer as Folk as a young gay kid in Ripon, Wisconsin, which is the birthplace of the Republican Party, by the way, and understanding the ways in which that was like revolutionary. And so if you can see it, you can be it, right? I want to turn to an aspect that I think oftentimes is where we go to right away when we talk about religion and sexuality, is the ugly side of religion, the stuff that we don't like to talk about. And I know, Mike, you have a section in the film that really breaks down this point very beautifully. I was drawn to get a PhD in religion because I don't know, I kind of enjoy people telling me I'm going to hell. I always really kind of like to find out why they think that, right? So I would start asking them questions. Well, why do you think this? What's going on, right? But in truly understanding the ugliness of religion, you can find the beauty. And I think with your movie, you address it, but then at the end you leave it with this beautiful expression of love. And I would love for everyone to kind of talk about that journey, maybe personally with themselves, or how they want to portray it a little bit more, because the ugliness of religion is a reality we can't deny, but how we can get to the beautiful part is ultimately where I think we all want to go. And Mike, maybe I'll kick it to you first.
Yeah, I think that point is so important, because I do think that in any religion, any religious guideline, any sort of life motto, if you have the impetus to be violent, you'll use that to justify your violence. If you have the impetus to love, you'll use that to justify how fiercely you will love, right? I think we have to assume the onus on how we choose to utilize the text and or our faiths. For me personally, what's really, what's very, very true for me is that I think, I don't think I've ever said this out loud in a public setting, so whatever. City of West Hollywood brings out the best in me. I think that if certain people had their way, I would not have my faith. If I believed what a lot of people in my life chose to tell me that about who I was, about how God felt about me, about what I was doing. If I believed them, I may not be where I am right now, but I will tell you what is so profoundly true for me is that a power much greater and much higher than their voices emerged loudest in my head and in my heart to tell me, despite those voices, stay exactly on the track that you're on, do the things that you're doing, and believe that your voice, my own voice, deserve to be the loudest in my own head. And I think there is something inexplicable about faith in that way. I will also say, out of the other side of my mouth, that my faith was always a part of my life, but I grew up in a town where everyone practiced like me. I grew up in Dearborn, Michigan, which has the highest concentration of Arabs outside of the Middle East, most of whom are Muslim. And there is a cultural practice there that I grew up with, but it wasn't until 9/11 where I think I was in musical theater circles, New York circles, other circles outside of the homogeny that I grew up in, where people were looking to me to be a guide and a resource. And I could then take all of the things that I had learned and then really, really sort of learn the faith in the way that meant that spoke to me directly, right? It became less about a blind cultural following and more about a very specific approach to the faith that then could speak a larger message to those who were really trying to make sense of a lot of things in a post 9/11 world. And here we are 20 years later, and frankly, my Muslim narrative has nothing to do with 9/11, and I certainly continue to say that, but out of that experience, I really was able to develop an individualized relationship with my faith and my religion.
I'd like to just jump in and lift up something that you said, Mike, that I think is the difference between us making it as queer people of faith and not making it. And that is when we realize that what God thinks of us, or what our tradition says about us, or what our texts say about us, is only what someone says God thinks about us, and what someone says the tradition is about and thinks about us, and what someone says our texts say about us. Once you realize that, God's not the enemy. The Torah, the Quran, or your sacred texts aren't the enemy anymore. They're the leaders who distorted them and failed to actually give us access to the tradition, and instead really perverted what they're about. And once those are the bad guys, we're back in business.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about masjid and the work that we do in similar spaces is that for me, I am actually a very religious person and a very practicing person. And I grew up that way as someone who really felt the presence of God in their life. And then at some point, because I was coming to terms with gender inequality in my community, with various types of nationalisms and with, homophobia and many of these things, I felt like I had to walk away. And it wasn't until I remember these moments as such milestones, the ways people remember these like big moments in their lives. The very first moment that I was invited to this queer Muslim space in New York, while I was living there, because I kept seeing this other Muslim person, and I sort of knew she was queer, and she was like, oh, this person that you're always with, is she your friend? And I was like, oh, and I like, so, big gasp of courage and said, well, that's my partner. And she's like, oh, you're queer? Okay, great. I'm queer too. You need to come to this thing. And it was really life-changing, because it was the first time in my life that I learned that where I could pray without standing behind men, which always felt, like, I was someone who was very traditionally trained and was taught how to read the Quran properly in Arabic. And, to like stand behind men who were less knowledgeable than me always felt like grating, right? Or to be like, oh, I can have a gender integrated prayer space, or I could wear whatever I want. Any of these sorts of examples, I think, led me on a journey to say, I can recover the parts of my faith that actually mean a lot to me and that are an enormous part of my life, and bring me great comfort and joy. And then to engage with these other interpretations of the tradition that were hidden from me for so long. So that's sort of my personal journey. And being a community organizer, I get the like pleasure and honor to watch people go through this journey. Every day. We just had a whole full month of Ramadan programming, and you just get these messages from these little baby queers, saying like, I can't believe there are queer Muslims and they're hanging out and we can still pray together. And it's just the most gratifying thing in the world.
That's so beautiful. Christopher?
Yeah, I think I kind of I don't want to like yes and what Benet said about that, and also Mike, but that within the Christian community, because that's what my faith is. I'm a Christian, and I'm also very devout, as I am in a Bible study every morning. A little quiet in the Christian culture, we like to call that quiet time, especially in the South. So that is very integrated in who I am, and what I think resonates for me in the Christian community is I never, as a young man, knowing that I was gay at a very, very early age, I never thought or questioned like, I'm going to go to hell, or I'm not a Christian anymore if this is true. It was what the pastors were saying, or what the Bible study leader was saying. That was the negative messaging, or the confusing messaging was what was coming out of man's mouth, and not God's mouth. And there's a Bible verse that is I think it's Psalm 118:8, which says, "It is better to trust the Lord than put your confidence in man." And that's kind of been like a big mantra for me, just in all areas of my life. It's just like, I'm gonna go with what I'm hearing from my God, and not from what this human is telling me to do. And so I really resonate with Mike mentioned that, and then kind of Benet put like a nice label on it. So thank you for that. So I think for my personal journey was more about navigating the human relationships within my coming out, or my process of being a gay man. That was, I think, less spiritual, and my intimacy with the Lord, or with my God, is stronger now than it ever was. Like when I was fighting being queer, or fighting being gay, or thinking that it was wrong, it's much stronger now that I'm like, that it's not an issue. So yeah. And also Christianity, I have to say, is a tricky bitch, because they say that they're always about, like, all are welcome. Christ died for everyone's sins. Everyone is here, coming to this table. And then as soon as you sit down, they're like, okay, you can't wear that. That skirt's too short. That, it's just like, it's so like traumatizing. So, yeah, but anyway, I think it's navigating the human voice that was the hardest part.
That's such a great way to say it, and how we navigate that personal faith is so important, and as a religious studies scholar, I always say there's a big difference between religious studies and theological studies, right? The study of faith versus the study of religion. Religion is oftentimes the study of people. And as we all have been really talking about, people make these communities. People are not perfect, as we all can talk about, as Christopher talked about, with many people liking to say, come on in, but not you, not you, not you, and maybe not you in the back. But ultimately where we get to. And, one thing that really struck me, specifically because this is so important in our community, is the way in which impurity but sobriety is really talked about throughout the film, with alcohol in many ways. And I know that not only in Muslim cultures, but also very strict Jewish cultures as well as Christianity. You look at Mormonism and temperance and the whole study around that. Sobriety itself, but then alcohol and these impurities play a big role in the film, and how you might not fit into West Hollywood's bar culture, right? And how you feel like you have to go out to drink or not. I know there's that scene with you, Christopher, at the dinner table and how we all talk about that, but why did you choose maybe?
Can I just say that was my favorite scene?
Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay,
I mean, yes.
My daughter and I were just so, like, you were so deliciously horrible. You are amazing. And okay, love it. Sorry, John, but
No,
I just gotta say it.
It's
That
a
scene
beautiful
was
scene.
amazing.
It's a great scene, but I want to ask Mike, what is it about sobriety and the conversation you had? And Christopher, because you are in this scene that we're talking about, I mean, how did you play this up in the script and really make it come out in the horrible, although wonderful, because you acted the shit out of it, way that Benet really talked about it?
Yeah, I mean, yes, Christopher Hanke is phenomenal in the film. And it's, and it was very easy to direct him because he required no direction, because he really knew how to nail it. So I'm so grateful that he was in this film, and he knows this. I've told him this, but it's important to continue to say publicly. I was fangirling the entire time we were, from the moment he came into the audition space and through filming. I'm such a huge, huge fan of him. Listen, I don't drink, and it's caused a problem for me. Being invited to things, dating. I mean, people don't want to date someone who doesn't drink sometimes, certain people, right? It's just been, it's no issue for me. And it's no issue for me that others choose to drink, but people seem to have an issue with the fact that I don't drink and how it may or may not interrupt their social life. And it's been an interesting thing to navigate. And I actually do keep a dry house. This is, from the film, but I do keep a dry house. And someone many, many years ago came over to my house with wine, and they were like, "Oh, but it's okay, right? Because it's just wine." And so that was a real pull right from my own life. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think especially when it comes to like building the romance part of the film, like I think eliminating any of the things that could have, sped up what was intended to be a very slow and methodical build to their relationship. And like, obviously the structural convention of Ramadan was very helpful because they weren't going to do anything while the sun was up. And but I think like, I just also think, as much as we don't see queer faith-based things merge into things that sort of work in harmony, we don't often get to also just be in a space where we don't have to rely on enhancers or inhibitors or things that sort of make us more comfortable. We are enough to be comfortable within whatever space we are.
So true. Christopher.
Well, first of all, that scene was delicious and incredible. First of all, thank you, Benet. But secondly, and moreover, and overall, that scene is genius because Mike is genius. So I just like showed up, memorized the lines, and said them. So really, the writing is incredible, and that and just where that hits in the film, and the arc of the characters, and it was a joy to say those words and to be a. I don't know if I can say. I'm not going to say that with the word I want to say. But I do enjoy playing those characters that are not perfect. I've always been cast as those, like the guy that's like just an asshole, but like maybe there's a thread of possible redemption, but probably not underneath it. Like I love writing that line. I mean, it's it's just so boring to be perfect and like to play a perfect character, or like I enjoy the ones that are very, very messy. But it's mostly that scene was just so great. So Mike, thank you. I right back at you. Thank you for having me there. But I also want to say that, like, in regards to, like, I think you slightly mentioned this, John, about like how was it easy to play it or to get in there. I think the reverse also is true, or has been for my life, when I have like been romantic or been on a date, and then I like take a moment to like say a quick blessing before my dinner, and then the person's like, I'm sorry, where'd you just go just now? Like, we're like the opposite is true. We're like so, which is the same as I guess what John experienced in that, like, well, but what John doesn't say but implies is, but you're gay, right? So like that, I've just experienced that in my life about, yeah, I'm gay, but I'm also going to say this prayer, or I'm also going to, yeah, that's a Bible, right? So I've just been in that experience personally, so it's just easy to draw from.
Iman, Benet, I want to make sure you have space here to throw in some brilliance.
Yeah, no, I agree. This scene was great, and I can't top what's already been said. So
Same. I'm also not a drinker. I don't know. I'm gonna pass on that one.
No worries. Well, it is. I can't believe it's nearing that time, but we did get a couple of questions in, and this one's near and dear to my heart because I haven't eaten at all today, really. But it's food in this film. I mean, food and religion brings community together. Food and religion itself is a place where we heal, but we find, we have those conversations. It's so beautiful. I mean, do not watch this film hungry, by the way, or do, and then go out and have a delicious meal afterwards. But food and religion plays such an important role. Mike, it's very purposeful for why you put a lot of food in there, but the role of food and religion, I would love for you to break down, and anyone chime into this a little bit more.
I mean, and we have to shout out, I don't know if it's West Hollywood proper, but it's right on the border of West Hollywood. It's a restaurant called Open Sesame, which provided all of the food for the film. It's a wonderful restaurant. Ali, the owner of the restaurant, is an incredible ally to this film, and was also our on-set food stylist, along with one of our producers, Sarah Bazzi. Look, culturally speaking, mostly as an Arab, but also as an Arab Muslim, like if you have bad food, like your reputation's over. If you have no food, leave town, move, like you're done. So like there is just so much to be said about how food plays into community building, community gathering, and especially during the holy month of Ramadan, where it is the focus of Ramadan is obviously not about food, but that breaking of the fast, that first meal after a long day of fasting, is so sacred and should feel like an event. It should feel sort of celebratory in a lot of ways. And I also think, like, as a storyteller, how do I disrupt all of the narratives in mainstream, tropes of Islam and Muslims and whatever? I do all of the things that I know people are going to want, and that's food, comedy, like all the things that sort of bridge us all together and bring us out. And really, like the things that say, I love that, I'm going to eat that later, I'm like them, I'm eating this, and we all love good food. It doesn't matter sort of who we pray to or don't pray to. So I think for me, it's really, as you said in the very beginning, it is a way of building community.
I would add to that food is also often a site of identity markers, right? So, being the kid who doesn't eat pork, right? It's like there's all this kind of like, there's all this like work, but also comedy and levity around it as a kid, right? And I know there's sort of a joke in the Muslim community being like, oh, I'm the kind of Muslim who'll do everything but eat pork, because eating pork is like the last, and it really signifies the ways that, and that's a different relationship, obviously, than the one in the film, because it's one of sort of abstaining from something. But I think it speaks to that sort of complex relationship that food has with religious identities.
And if anyone's looking for real comedy, watch two Muslims talk about gelatin and whether they'll eat it, and Starburst. That like that unto itself is like its own comedy sketch that will always just kill.
Sounds like you got a new short coming up there, Mike.
Oh, it's in the next one. Don't worry.
In the next one. Benay.
What I loved about the food and community aspect of the film is that usually in a religious setting, it's the biological family, it's the mother typically who is making the meal, and the queer kid is either comfortable or uncomfortable there at the parents' table with their partner or not. And in your film, Mike, it was the chosen family and it was the queer folk who were making the food and coming together, and they were the center of the community. And that was just so beautiful.
As someone who grew up in Wisconsin, every Friday we would get fish, and I refused to eat it. And so every time my mother ordered from the same restaurant every Friday, they would always say, "Who's the non-Catholic staying with you?" And it was always like they would always out me in many ways, more than one. So food itself is so critical, and that scene right at the end of the film where they're together and the parents are there. My favorite line is, "Look at his arms." But like I just laughed so hard at that line. But how that brings them together, and then the build up to that kiss at the end that just leaves you on this journey is so beautiful. And we only have a couple minutes left, Mike. But that ending scene gave me chills. A lot of the scene in the movies gave me chills. But why did you choose to end it in that way? It's so beautiful, but it's so, his parents are there. I mean, all of the things that discuss what we talked about. Why did you leave it with that kiss?
I have to tell you a story about that kiss. Up until very late into the process, the script actually never called for the kiss. And we did an early test screening, and a very, very trusted friend of one of our producers said, I think there's actually some, I forget the way exactly he put it, but he said there's like almost some inherent internalized homophobia by not including it. You're almost like calling out the thing that you're saying you're okay with by not doing the kiss, right? And we shot the kiss. We thought we might use it as an extra or like post credit, like we shot it, which is another funny story unto itself, which we won't tell here. But I thought about what he said, and I just love that there's always stuff to learn. We're always growing and looking inwards and what we can do better. And I think when we put the kiss in, and then we put the kiss in the background of a family that you don't typically see on screen, and have them lovingly chatting in the foreground while this kiss was having in the background. For me, like I wasn't even thinking that it needed to be there. And now I can't imagine it not there with that being the final image. Like that is exactly the sort of, if we were even cheesier than we already are, we would have sort of framed a heart and sort of panned out of that. But it's, it almost didn't happen. It now exists forever in the film, thank God, and thank Danny. But it does perfectly wrap up the exact context of what we're saying, which is this family and this structure may not look familiar, but that's only because you've never seen it, and now start to believe that this is the trajectory towards the norm of what it should be.
It's such a beautiful way to show this little colorful queer community that we have both here as well as everywhere. And it is that time of the night where we're going to have to wrap it up at, truly on behalf of the city of West Hollywood, on behalf of all the viewers on YouTube. I just clicked on it. So hello, everyone watching. Thank you for tuning into such an amazing conversation. But truly, thank you to this esteemed group of panelists. I mean, I'm in awe of each and every one of you. I'm just so thankful you gave us just a little bit of your time to talk about something that's so personal. And I hope everyone will tune in for the rest of Pride Month stuff that we have going on here in West Hollywood, a part of One City, One Pride. And you can go to weho.org/pride. And with that, I want to thank everyone for attending, thank our panelists once again, and stay safe, and we'll see you on the other side.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.